We want to thank Eric for joining us today. Eric guides families worldwide through the college application processes and focuses on learning differences in education for neurodiversity. He serves on the Learning Differences Neurodiversity Committee of the Independent Educational Consultants Association. He's a licensed psychologist, professional writer, and former college professor. Eric uses his background to assist families of children with special needs through the secondary education process. He also runs, I believe, a Facebook group for parents who are in this process that has almost 7,000 members. And I think if you don't share that, if that's not part of your slide, maybe we could put that link for people in the chat at some point. So, oh, wow, 14,000 students. So, but Eric, with that, thank you so much for joining us. I believe you're out in LA, so joining us all the way from the other side of the country, and I'm excited to hear your presentation.
Thanks everyone for joining. Hope you're enjoying the event so far. I'm Eric Endlich. We're going to be talking about transition from high school for neurodivergent students. Some of it may apply for students with other kinds of disabilities. So if you have a child with different kind of disability, hopefully a lot of this will be applicable as well. We do primarily focus on students with learning differences such as autism, ADHD, dyslexia, other learning disabilities, but I have worked with students with other kinds of disabilities. I had a deaf student a couple of years ago, and I have a student this year with a vocal condition. I am a clinical psychologist by profession, and I became a full-time educational consultant to help students with disabilities make that successful transition from high school to college. So I'd like to start with this kind of sentiment that your development has to go at its own pace. It just doesn't happen to be the usual pace. Our kids, I believe, will get where they need to go, but there's no deadline for a lot of these transitions, so it's okay if it takes a little bit longer. That is a photo of one of my actual students from last year. We help with all aspects of the college transition process. That includes figuring out if students should take a gap year, and if so, what they should be doing during that year, how to structure their summers, extracurricular activities, figuring out where to find the support they need in college, building that college list, getting the essays done. Had a lot of students apply for the November 1st deadline, so I'm just catching my breath after working intensively with seniors in the last several weeks. We help with other pieces relating to the application process, like prepping them for interviews, reviewing their resumes, helping them understand, the Common App and other processes. I was based in New England for a very long time. I just recently moved to the West Coast. And we also help kind of understand affordability and building a list that's going to help students maximize their scholarships, and sometimes even appealing those awards too. So this is our nationwide team. April's actually located in Connecticut. Melanie's in Massachusetts. We are sort of scattered around the country, and we have collectively expertise in a lot of different areas. For example, Jamie knows about recruited athletes, which is not my specialty. Alicia has worked with a number of international students and so on. So I would love to hear from folks, if you have a child in high school or college, what year your child or children are in, and what concerns you have about college or about the transition from high school. So feel free to start putting stuff in the chat, and I will address your questions at the end. I don't usually stop in the middle to answer questions unless they are something very specific about the slide that maybe wasn't clear. Let's talk about all the different options after high school. Now, to be clear, we specialize in working with students who are going to be seeking a college degree-seeking college students, although we occasionally work with college transfer students or college students applying for grad school, applying to grad school. Not so much students with the other options, but I want to be clear, college is not the only choice or the best choice for everyone. So you can certainly take time after college to do a gap year or a postgraduate year, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. You can go straight into the workforce, of course. You can start your own business. That may sound kind of ambitious for a young person, but I have high school students who've started their own business. Starting your own business doesn't necessarily mean a huge company. It could be starting a dog walking business or a house sitting business or a leaf raking business. Going to trade technical or technical school. The trades, I think the workforce and the careers available to young people are rapidly changing. There are jobs available that weren't available when I was a high school student, and there will be jobs in the future that aren't available now. And there are jobs, of course, that are disappearing. But I think being in the trades is something that there will probably be a need for the foreseeable future. Plumbing, electrical, carpentry, you name it. I think those trades will be around for a long time. Certificate programs, I'll talk a little bit about these. I didn't put it in a slide, but I want to mention that there are non-degree certificate programs for students with intellectual disabilities or other developmental disabilities. So if you have a child who really wants some sort of college-like experience or wants to build independent living skills, but is not going to be capable of earning a college degree because of an intellectual disability or similar profile, there are programs around the country for those students. And again, I'm not really going to talk about those in detail. Actually, I have a colleague who is I believe she's in Connecticut, who specializes in that population. So I'm happy to connect folks to her when that makes more sense. I am aware of these programs, but it's not what we specialize in. You can go into the Peace Corps, you can go into the military, you can go to a community college, and of course, you can go into a so-called four-year college. I say so-called because many students don't graduate in 4 years. It's a little bit of a myth. The nationwide graduation rate after 6 years is around 60%. Even though I said, there's all these other options, to be clear, on average, when you look at national data, the more education you have, the higher your weekly earnings or monthly, yearly earnings. So finishing high school, getting some college, getting an associate's degree, bachelor's degree, graduate degree, each step of the way, your earnings on average tend to be higher. Of course, there are exceptions. We've all heard about tech billionaires who dropped out of college. And one also has to take into account the fact that college can be expensive in this country. And so if you're going to rack up a lot of debt, you got to weigh that against how much more you might expect to earn. You don't want to go into a massive amount of debt from college if you can avoid it. So I mentioned the Peace Corps is one option. If you're not familiar with it, it's a 2-year commitment. So it's a pretty substantial commitment. You'd be living somewhere else in the world. You'd have the opportunity to make a difference, to help other people and build your confidence and skills and independence. If you've always wanted to live abroad, it's a way to do that, essentially at no cost to you, because the Peace Corps is paying for your travel, your housing, your living, your medical, dental, and you even get some stipend at the end to help you get started with your next phase in life. And there may be some scholarship money available for college, but that's variable. If 2 years sounds like a huge commitment or you don't want to leave the country, AmeriCorps is sort of the domestic version of it. It's a shorter commitment, 3 to 12 months. It also involves volunteering to help in any number of different sectors. Could be with the elderly, could be housing, disaster relief, et cetera. There's something of a living allowance, and there's some money available at the end to help pay for college or student loans, but it's less than it would be for the Peace Corps because it's less of a commitment. So certificate programs, not the kind I was mentioning before, the non-degree certificate programs in colleges for students with intellectual disabilities, but other types of vocational certificate programs. This is just a small sample of programs, but the idea is to show you that in a few months you can earn a certificate that will help you earn a decent living and do skilled work in medical fields, in other sorts of fields. There's lots of IT certificates. Many of those are online to learn how to do software, coding, et cetera. I mentioned community college is one option. Well, what are the advantages of community college? Often folks are trying to figure out, does that make the most sense? Is that the best option? Well, it has certain advantages. First of all, it tends to be the cheapest option for higher education. So in some states, it's free. Depends on a whole bunch of factors. At worst, it tends to be much less expensive than four-year colleges. So anywhere from inexpensive to free. Often there's a community college located close to where the student's been living in high school. And so that allows us to break up the transition into two steps. Because if you go straight from high school to living at college, you're making two big leaps at the same time. One is you're going from high school level academics to college level academics. So you're making a leap in your academic the challenge. And the second is that you're going from living with your parents or guardians to living more independently away from them, possibly for the first time. If you stay at home and go to community college, you're just making one of those leaps, and you've kind of broken that transition up into two steps. Also, you can get an associate's degree in community college. There are actually increasingly community colleges that allow you to earn a bachelor's degree, but that's still kind of unusual. Or you could just be there for a few months for less than 2 years and get some sort of professional certificate that would let you go straight into a career, being an X-ray technician or any number of other things. And then you have the option in a community college to study part-time. Typically, in a four-year college, you're going full-time. Sometimes you can get a reduced course load, but it's not always an easy thing to do at a four-year college. Community college, you can take one course, two courses, whatever works for you. You can work to pay for it and to save up money for later. And if you do get an associate's at a community college and you have decent grades, you can transfer to a four-year college. And many states have something called articulation agreements, where it's a guaranteed admission to a public university. So it's kind of a almost red carpet rolled out for you that you go straight into a university without too much difficulty. So moving on from different options, let's focus now on the four-year colleges. What are the challenges for our neurodivergent students, our students with learning differences in applying to college? So this is a stressful process. It's actually been rated as the #1 stressor, academic stressor for high school students, unfortunately. First thing is there's a lot of choices to sort through. So where are you going to apply? There's thousands of colleges in the US. Narrowing that down, figuring out which ones are the best fit for you can be overwhelming for high school students. And I hear these kinds of reactions all the time, that students get really anxious when they're going through the process because it's all new to them. They've never done it before. Figuring out what kind of support are you going to need in college? Do you need support for independent living skills? Do you need support for staying organized and managing your time? There's a lot of different things that needs that students have. And so we help them figure out what kind of support they need and where can they get that, which colleges are going to be the best fit for them. And we'll talk more about this later. And then even if the adults in the picture, me as the consultant or the parents or staff at school, and I like to have a big collaborative team working together, even if a lot of us agree, hey, this kid needs this kind of support in college, the student has to be on board too. So the student has to accept that, okay, I need help making friends in college. I need help managing my time in college. If they are not on board, then it doesn't really matter what the rest of us think. Writing essays in the college application process, very stressful for students. These essays are fundamentally different from the essays they're used to writing at school, very different purpose and approach. And so that's anxiety provoking. What are the colleges looking for? What should I write about? How do I organize it? This is actually my favorite part of the process. I've been a lifelong writer. I'm a part-time professional writer and editor, so I really enjoy this and helping students work through that anxiety and come out the other end with good essays. Often students have something on their transcript or their application that might be a little confusing or unusual. Maybe they didn't take any foreign languages in high school because they have a disability waiver. Maybe they got diagnosed with ADHD halfway through high school, and they went on medication, and now their grades are going up. Or they went on an IEP or a 504, they got the accommodations they need, and their grades are going up. So how do they address that in the application process? Should they disclose their diagnosis? I just did a whole presentation on this at a conference a couple of weeks ago. Happy to talk about the whole disclosure question. Do they take standardized tests? Do they report the scores in this test optional world that we're living in now? And then how do they meet those deadlines if they struggle with time management? Well, I asked 50 parents of neurodivergent students, what are your top concerns in the application process? And they rated finding the disability support as number one, writing the essays, selecting the colleges, managing time, and dealing with the amount of work involved. So this is like our bread and butter. This is what we help with, and these are the biggest concerns for parents. How about searching for colleges, building that college list, which is what we do in junior year of high school, hopefully not earlier or later. I love starting to work with students in 9th or 10th grade. I love kind of developing that working relationship, helping them plot out their high school course, explore what they're interested in, figuring out what they're going to do over the summer. But we don't talk about looking at colleges until junior year, unless students really want to, which they usually don't. But so during junior year, we're trying to build that list, and most of the usual suspects apply. That is the same things that any student would be looking at. Where's the college located? How much is it going to cost? How big is it? Can I study what I'm interested in at this college? Do they have clubs or sports that appeal to me? Is it urban? Is it suburban? What's the vibe on campus? All these things that every other student is considering, plus this issue of support. If I need certain kinds of support to thrive and succeed in high school, which colleges are going to offer that? And on our website, topcollegeconsultants.com, I have a database of what I call neurodiversity-friendly colleges, over 200 colleges. You can sort it by state if you were looking for particular states, of colleges that have support programs, neurodiversity clubs, additional services, etc. When I asked these 50 parents, what are your top concerns about college selection? The top concerns were finding the majors that my student wants, finding executive function support, finding the right vibe or culture, and the quality of disability services available. Now let's imagine that you've already applied to college. You've hopefully gotten accepted. All of our students get accepted, so at least some of their colleges, in some cases, all of the ones they apply to. What about adjusting to college? What are the challenges involved in making that transition and successfully adapting to being a college student? Well, from my standpoint, these are top concerns that I see. Making friends. So a lot of our students have been with the same kids for years, either throughout high school, maybe the same kids even in elementary and middle school. Now they're going to a college where they may not know anybody, or maybe they know one or two kids in the whole college, and they have to make friends from scratch for the first time in a long time. This may be, unless you've lived with a sibling or been living at a boarding school in high school, this may be the first time you've ever lived with somebody else in the same room. So there's that adjustment, sharing that living space, dealing with bedtimes and noise levels, figuring out what kind of support you're going to need in college. This issue doesn't go away. Sensory sensitivity for autistic students or others who might be sensitive to sights, smells, bright lights, loud sounds, eating in the dining hall, living in a loud residence hall. That can be an issue. Mental health, need I say more? This is increasingly a huge concern for many of our students. We touched on managing time. This comes up over and over. Managing money, your eating habits, your sleeping habits, your bathing habits can be an issue for some students. Maybe it might be the first time you've had to really take care of your medication on your own, get refills, and remember to take your medication, and staying motivated and focused throughout the semester. Again, ask those 50 parents, what are your top concerns about your student successfully transitioning to college, or if your student has already transitioned to college? And these were the top 5 things that they said. keeping up with the workload, making friends, asking for help, maintaining their mental health, and time management, which is, of course, is related to keeping up with the workload. So that executive function piece, organizational skills, just comes up over and over again. It's an issue for almost all the students we work with. So if you have a child who is in high school and they are taking challenging courses, let's say AP courses, honors, accelerated, IB, dual enrollment meaning they're taking a course at a community college and getting college and high school credit. If they're taking those challenging courses and getting A's or B's, it's safe to think that they can probably handle college level academics, that they are college capable. However, that doesn't mean they're college ready, because that involves being ready to handle the independence of living away from your parents or guardians and managing all those things I touched on earlier. Here's another definition of college readiness, courtesy of Jake Weld from Mansfield Hall. Students have to be able to independently figure out when they need help, not just help with their studies, but emotionally, socially, healthcare. They need to seek out those services on their own because their parents aren't living with them in the dorms. They need to go to that counseling center or health center. And if they encounter obstacles, that someone didn't answer their phone call or return their email, they need to persist despite those obstacles. And once they've gotten the help at the tutoring center or the counseling center, they need to apply what they've learned. If they can do all that on their own, they're probably fairly ready for college. I'm a clinical psychologist and former therapist, so I am particularly attuned to whether someone's emotionally ready. And I think of it in this sense. What is your characteristic response to stress? When you've been overwhelmed by stress in the past, did you become depressed? Did you develop panic attacks? Did you get into excessive eating or gaming or social media use or substance abuse? What is your characteristic response to stress? Do you withdraw, etc.? What are the red flags that this is starting to happen? How would you know if your depression was starting to come back? Is it that you stopped responding to your friends' texts, that you stopped exercising, that you started sleeping longer or eating more or eating less? You want to know what are the signs that this issue might be coming back. Thirdly, what are the go-to strategies that have helped you in the past? Maybe getting back into exercise or meditation or petting your dog or going for a walk or listening to music. Whatever those are, you want to have a set of go-to strategies. And then finally, if those strategies aren't working, where do you get more help? If you're in college, you need to know what's the next step. How do I get back on medication? How do I get back into therapy? Moving on to college and high school differences. If you've attended college, this should be no surprise to you, but I'm going to highlight some of the most important differences. In high school, students' lives, their days during the week tend to be very structured. You wake up in the morning, or maybe your parents wake you up in the morning, you have breakfast, hopefully rush off to school. You're in school for many hours. After school, it's band practice or sports practice or SAT prep or homework, eating dinner, doing some more homework. Before you know it, you go to sleep and start all over again. It's a packed, full, structured day. And if you are on an IEP or a 504, your services are sort of delivered to you. You show up at school, and there's that special ed teacher or resource room or accommodations or speech therapy or whatever it is you get. It's kind of delivered to you. You don't have to do a whole lot to make it happen as a student. And the law that applies to special education in high school is focused on helping students succeed, making effective progress. So there is a responsibility on the school district to help students be successful. In college, this is all different. Many fewer hours in class. In fact, it wouldn't be unusual to have an entire day during the week where you have no class at all, maybe even more than one day where you have no class. And it's completely up to you how you spend your time. Nobody's forcing you to do your assignments, but those assignments tend to be more extensive, many more pages of reading, longer papers to write. So you've got to structure your time to make sure those big assignments get completed. The supports are available, the disability accommodations are available, but the student has to self-advocate. The student has to be proactive and make it happen. Nobody's going to knock on their door and say, oh, I heard that you have ADHD, let's help you out. And the law that applies to college, the same law that applies in the workplace, the Americans with Disabilities Act, emphasizes accessing the curriculum. But once the student has access to the curriculum with disability accommodations, it is entirely up to the student whether they succeed or not. That falls on the student. And extra supports and services, again, the student has to seek them out. They don't fall in their lap. In order to be successful in college, I break this down into 3 different areas. The first is self-awareness. What are you good at, and what areas could you use help with? And this doesn't just apply to academics like, oh, I'm not so good in math or I'm not so good in English. This also applies to socially. How do you handle conflict? Emotionally, how do you handle disappointment if you get a grade that you're disappointed with, or if you have a social interaction that didn't go the way you hoped it would? You need to know, how do you respond to challenges? And that way, by knowing that, you can then self-advocate and seek out resources to address those challenges. If you know that you're not doing well, if you're aware that you're falling behind, then you can go to the tutoring center or the writing center or the math center and get help. If you know that you're developing a health problem, then you can schedule appointments or go to appointments at the health center. And then finally, how are you able to manage things like your emotional reactions to your roommate, manage your time, manage your motivation so that you keep going despite those long assignments and difficult courses? And can you manage your habits like sleep and use of social media and your eating habits? So some students don't eat very well in college. Some students eat too much. Many of them, don't sleep enough or sleep too much and miss class. You need to manage all that stuff as a student. Now, there is a lot of support in college, but it varies from college to college. And as I said, we have a database on our website of the colleges that offer more support. So every college in the US, by and large, I say every, 99.9% offer disability accommodations. So if you just go on a standard tour to a college and you get that information session, which is delivered by admissions staff, and you say, hey, my child has dyslexia, autism, learning disability, what can you do for them at this college? They're going to describe the Disability Services Office and say, we have this great office, we have staff they can meet with and get all sorts of accommodations. But you need to understand that is the basic level that every college offers. That's not something special at that particular college. That's the bare bones level you can get anywhere. And for many students, that's all they need. They just need extra time on tests or testing a distraction-reduced environment or getting the instructor's notes or recorded lectures, et cetera. And by the way, accommodations are not just academic. Accommodations could be, for example, in the dining hall if you have food allergies, could be in the residence hall if you need a single room for medical reasons. So there's all kinds of accommodations, some of which you didn't really run into in high school because you weren't living there unless you were at a boarding school. And then some colleges have another layer, another level of services. They may have sort of a la carte services like academic coaching, also known as executive function coaching, which may or may not be at an additional price. And then finally, sort of the deluxe level is a comprehensive learning support program, and that's a much smaller number of colleges that have this. It may be an autism support program that is only for students with an autism diagnosis, or it may be a learning support program open to any student with a learning difference, regardless of what specific learning difference it is. And those programs typically have multiple components. They may have the academic coaching. They usually have the academic coaching. They may have priority registration. They may have peer mentors. They may have social activities. They may have a whole bunch of different components. Those programs often come at an additional cost, not always, but often. And there's many different ways to get support. So I'm going to touch on some different ways to skin a cat, so to speak. So if you're, thinking about, wow, my kid needs help with a lot of these skills. Well, if you're still in high school, there's still time to work on these skills before you leave. You can work with the school counselor. You can hire a private counselor. You can hire an executive function coach. You can take courses. My daughter took personal finance in high school. I think it was one of the most useful, applicable courses she took. You can take a gap year, or a postgraduate year. And during that year, you can do pretty much anything. I don't recommend you spend that year sitting at home watching TV. You can get a job and earn money, volunteer, do some independent project like record an album, write a novel. But if you need to work on these skills, a good option for you might be to enroll in a gap year or post-grad program with a college readiness focus. And there are such programs that are specifically for neurodivergent students. I actually did a panel discussion of a number of these programs, and you can find the recording on our YouTube channel, and you can find the link on our website. Also, during that year, your brain will continue to mature. So the part of your brain that is relevant for organization, for managing your impulses, for planning ahead, the frontal lobes, that continues to develop well into your mid to even your late 20s. It's not a coincidence that car rental companies don't rent to you until you're 26 or whatever the limit is, because your frontal lobe is still developing. So one more year before you start college, your organizational skills may be a little better. Your judgment may be a little bit better. I mentioned college readiness programs. It might just be a summer program of a few weeks before you start freshman year in college, or it could be a full gap year, full year-long program. And this is an opportunity to work on organizational skills, social skills, independent living skills. So we talked about working on skills in high school. We talked about working on skills between high school and college. Now I'm going to mention working on skills while you're in college, because maybe, a lot of students I see don't want to take a gap year, even though I might recommend it. They really want to go straight to college, but you can get support in college through a learning support program, which I've talked about. Wellness communities exist in some colleges. Sometimes they are a separate residence hall or a separate floor on a residence hall where all the students are committed to being substance-free and healthy, and there's a meditation room or yoga classes or things like that. So just a healthier environment to live in. Most colleges these days offer free mental health counseling. There may be a limit to that, but there's usually some mental health services available. All kinds of advising available in college, tutoring, free peer tutoring is pretty standard. Sometimes there's professional tutors available in college too. As I mentioned, learning support programs may have an additional cost. The advantage of going to a college that has a program is that those staff work at the college, so the services are more coordinated. They know what's involved in registering for courses. They know the college environment. So it's a more seamless way to get services. If it's an autism support program, there's most likely some sort of social component to it. A couple weeks ago, I was in Nashville for the Autism College Summit, which is a national gathering of autism support program directors. So great organization, the College Autism Network. And these programs can frequently provide support throughout college. Some of them are first-year programs, but most of them are available throughout college. Just mentioned another kind of unusual option, which is to go to a college that is exclusively for neurodivergent students, a college where all of the students there have learning differences. And there's only 2 of them in the country. That's Landmark College in Putney, Vermont, and Beacon College in Leesburg, Florida. I've toured both of them. They're both very small. They're both let's say they're not in a big city. So they're in sort of quiet, subdued environments. For some students, it's a great option, but there's no one option that's best for all students. All of the staff and instructors at these colleges are working with this population every day, so they are familiar with it. It's not going to be strange. It's going to be a welcoming, inclusive environment. Even if you're thinking, well, my kid is not going to go to a college like that, they do have summer programs for high school students. Landmark has a gap year program. Beacon has programs for college readiness during the high school, the academic year. So there's a lot of resources they have to offer, even if you're not looking to go to these colleges as a college student. And then one last option, and that would be to obtain support from outside the college. So maybe your child's just fallen in love with a college that doesn't have a support program. Maybe they've decided to go to a particular college because it's the closest to home or the least expensive, or it offers a specific major that they want that they can't find somewhere else. You can still bolster their services by adding on your own services that you find elsewhere. And that could be a private executive function coach. We do offer academic coaching, but I also know folks all around the country who do this work. It could be getting an outside therapist. The mental health services on campus tend to be somewhat limited. You can get an outside prescriber or provider therapist. Maybe you need a particular specialization in therapy. You can find comprehensive support programs that offer a bunch of different components, not just the executive function coach, and hire those programs to work with your student. In some cases, it would be in person, depending on where you're located, or it could be virtual anywhere in the country. So your student can still go to the college of their dreams and get the supports from outside providers. And then finally, the most high-level option in terms of services, the highest level of services would be a residential support program. So if your child really needs kind of staff around them a lot, they can live at a program and attend a nearby college. And there's a number of these around the country. I actually toured one while I was at the College Autism Summit at Nashville. And that particular program is across the street from a community college. So you can live at that program, which happens to be luxury apartments, get support from staff, all day, every day, and walk across the street and go to college. And as I said, there's a number of these around the country. This tends to be the most expensive option, super expensive. Think doubling the cost of what you can expect to pay for college, if not more. So unfortunately, not accessible to all families, but it is there for those for whom it's a good option. I always encourage students to be familiar with all of the college resources. Every college has so many resources, whether or not it has a separate learning support program. Faculty have office hours where you can, and most of these are free resources. There's no extra cost, free peer tutoring, academic advisor, career services, forming your own study group to help you stay on track with studies. Clubs, not to be overlooked. So you might think of clubs as being sort of frivolous or just fun stuff, but there are mental health clubs. Active Minds is a well-known chain of mental health clubs in colleges. And some students have created their own neurodiversity clubs at colleges. I'm seeing more of these every year where students get together and say, hey, I want other students who get what it's like to be neurodivergent, who I can make friends with and feel comfortable with and not have to hide or mask my differences. I don't think I said it before, but my own kids are neurodivergent, as am I. So I'm living this world all the time. Key resources. So I asked parents, the same 50 neurodivergent parents, what are the resources that you think are most important at colleges? And they particularly highlighted the Disability Services Center, academic coaching, and a support program. Now, again, all colleges pretty much have this Disability Services Center that helps you get disability accommodations. We can talk about that process in more detail if you want. Relatively few colleges have academic coaching or support programs. That is a smaller number. And again, I have a list of those programs. And then other things they highlighted were academic advising, clubs, tutoring, social events, and office hours. A few quick tips before I wrap up and leave some time for questions. I would love to know what you want to learn. If you have a child with a disability and they're going to be going to college, I recommend reaching out to the Disability or Accessibility Services office at the colleges early. And when I say early, I don't mean early when the child's enrolled in college. I'm talking about when you're doing the college search so that you can figure out, is this a good choice for my kid? And if you're wondering, well, what do I talk to them about? What do I ask them? I've got an article on our website. What questions should I ask the Disability Services Office? So I can help you with what you should ask. But that way you'll figure out early on, is this a good match? Am I going to be able to get the services I need? Do I like these staff? Do they seem qualified? Do they seem overworked? You're going to be dealing with these folks for 4 or more years. You want to know what you're getting into. And they are not all alike. Find out what available services are available. If you have something in your transcript or in your high school trajectory that needs explanation, that might be unusual or concerning to admissions readers, then that could be a reason to disclose your disability when you apply. You do not have to disclose. There is absolutely no obligation to disclose a disability when you apply to college, but there may be a reason to if there's something that needs explaining. And I could talk about that in more detail too. You're going to have to provide documentation of a diagnosis if you're going to be seeking disability accommodations or services. What that documentation consists of varies from college to college. So if you happen to have a neuropsychological test report that was done within 3 years of starting college, that is probably going to cover you at any college. Some colleges are super flexible. I toured one a few months ago that said, we'll take whatever you got. If it's an old evaluation, an IEP, 504, doctor's letter, whatever you got, bring it to us. We'll work with that. That is, I would say, on the most flexible end of the spectrum. So you need to find out what documentation you need so you don't show up and find out, oh, I need this evaluation, which I haven't even lined up yet, because that can take months to make that happen. And then think about, those college readiness programs or gap year programs if you're not fully college ready. You don't want to start college before you're ready and have to drop out. It's a very expensive proposition, and it is super hard on a kid's mental health and self-esteem. So main takeaways here, be thinking about college readiness, work on those readiness skills as soon as you can, and develop a plan after high school to get the support that you need. Welcome you to join our Facebook group if you are on Facebook. If you're not on Facebook, don't add another social media platform. They take up way too much time. But if you are on Facebook, feel free to join our group. It's called Parents of College-Bound Students with Learning Disabilities, ADHD, and ASD. That is the full name. That is a clickable link if you get the slides, but I can also put the link in the chat shortly if that would be helpful. And it is a great place for families to get free information and support from other families. If you're wondering, hey, has anybody had a kid go to this college? Has anyone had a kid go to this summer program or summer camp? Or I'm having this problem with my child, or I'm having this issue with the school. I'm confused. Has anybody dealt with this before? What is your advice? There are so many parents who've already gone down the path before you who can help you. These are just some sample resources. You can find all these links on the Top College Consultants website. The last two are actually recorded panel discussions. One was a gap year programs for neurodivergent students panel discussion, and the other was some support programs panel discussion with them. And then the one in the middle is that database, which I mentioned, of what I call neurodiversity friendly colleges. Thank you so much for hanging in there and being here and caring about your child. I would love to know, what questions do you have for me?
Thank you so much, Eric. Let me see if there are any questions. I know there are a few people who posted that they are parents of high school seniors and see if they had any questions. So I don't see any questions now, but I do think it is helpful for the parents of the high school seniors. You mentioned that you can self-disclose if you have a disability in your essay. Could you talk through the pros and cons of self-disclosing it within the essay?
Absolutely. So thanks, James. Here's the link to the Facebook group, by the way. There's two types of self-disclosure that happens in the application process. Again, totally optional. You do not have to disclose. There's no reason to think that disclosure is going to help you, and there's no reason to think that it's going to hurt you. across the board. There's no quota for these students, so you don't get extra points for having a disability. It's not going to help you get in. But they can't discriminate against you either. So it shouldn't hurt you. It would be illegal for them to discriminate based on a disability. Not to say that no one ever breaks the law, but there's no reason to assume that it would hurt you. As I mentioned, if you have some sort of unusual aspect to your transcript or your application, that's something that you could absolutely explain. But that wouldn't be something you'd put in the essay. It's something you'd be, if you're using the Common App, you go to the very end of the app, past the essay in the writing section, there's a question about whether you have additional information you want to share. If you answer yes to that question, it opens up another text box of up to 650 words to put in any additional information you want. That information could be a link to your YouTube channel or your resume, or your website if you have one. It could be information on why you didn't take foreign language courses. It could be information on why your transcript was sort of rocky, whatever that is you want to share. That's one type of disclosure. Another is what I call identity-focused disclosure. So a lot of kids I work with feel like their neurodivergence, their autism or ADHD is a central part of their story and of who they are. And they want to share that because the purpose of the essay is to help colleges get to know you. What's special about you? What's unique about you? Tell us about your journey, your story. That main essay is a very open-ended thing. There's supplemental essays too, but I'm not going to go too far into the weeds here. So some of my students, quite a few of them, have said, "Hey, I'm going to write about my autism. This is my story. You want to understand me? You got to understand my autistic self." And so that is kind of front and center. Again, totally optional. Those students, many of the students have written great essays and gotten into excellent colleges. One of my students last year who wrote about autism is at MIT this year. Another one's at Wesleyan College in Connecticut this year, Wesleyan University, sorry. And so those are a couple of options for disclosure. What else would you like to discuss?
Now, earlier on, you mentioned one of the important skills for college is self-awareness. So as parents, I know as we're preparing for this transition, getting ready to let our children pull away and go off to school, how can we identify if they do have enough self-awareness? And is there anything we can do to help build that self-awareness in students?
Yeah, so there's some college readiness tools that you can use. I have articles and longer presentations on college readiness, which I've got links to in the website with sort of a longer list of self-awareness. And so I would kind of look at different areas. Do you have self-awareness around your academic strengths? And not just, are you good at math or are you good at English, but also like, how do you learn best? What is the best time of day for you to study? Are you more kind of on and kind of mentally available in the morning or the evening? When should you be working on your assignments or homework? Do you study better by yourself or with other people around? Do you study better in a quiet area or with, music on headphones? Kind of knowing within each area, what is your style and how are you most effective? Socially, how are you at making friends? Are you outgoing? Do you do better with one-on-one? What would be kind of situations that would help you make friends, like joining a club with like-minded folks? Are you going to struggle to get along with roommates? Should you perhaps get a single room in a residence hall? Getting a single room is just a brief digression. It's not something you can just sort of, ask for and get automatically. But if you have disability documentation for why you should get that might be an option. And for some students, that's a better choice. So I kind of go through the different times of your day. What about getting up in the morning? Are you, is that something that you need to work on while you're still in high school and going to bed at a reasonable hour so that you get enough sleep to be effective the next day. I'm just going to stop because I see some more questions coming up, and
Yeah, there is
I
a
want to be sure to
yeah,
address
if
those.
you wouldn't mind. So we have two questions, and then I think after that we'll have to wrap up. But what approach would you have for conversations for support for the parent and child who both are neurodivergent, who are in denial for the need of services for their child?
Yeah, excellent question, Sabrina, and not an easy. There's no easy answer for this. I wish there was, but I think of it as a process. I tend to work more with the student. I do have parent meetings. I work with families on an unlimited package basis, so they can have as many meetings with me as they need, students and or parents. But most of the work is with the student. And sometimes students are only just getting diagnosed, towards the end of high school. Sometimes they haven't even been diagnosed yet, and they don't get diagnosed to college or beyond. So some of them haven't had a lot of time to come to terms with their diagnosis. And I don't see it as just this sort of one and done thing of like, you just got to accept it and accept that you need services. But as I'm working with them, getting to know them, kind of their defenses start to come down. And I ask them, what services are you finding useful now? And what are the things that you could potentially use help with in college? And that needle sometimes moves over time. So they may say, first it's more defensive and I don't need anything. I'm just going to go to college. I'll be fine. I'll see how it goes. If I need services later on, I'll worry about that later on, which is a terrible approach, by the way. Saying I'll put that in place later is like saying, I'll sign up for fire insurance after my house burns down. You want those things in place in case you need them. So it's a process, and yeah, often the parents neurodivergent too. Where did our kids get it from? Many of these conditions are inherited, so it's often from one or more of the parents. In my case, it's from me. So yeah, it's an ongoing conversation. Like I said, I'm a former therapist, so I'm very comfortable talking about having challenging conversations with folks. But it's not easy.
So now, another question is, for a student who's a senior in high school, transitioning but not going to college, do you have recommendations for developing skills for intellectually disabled teens that want to get access to better jobs?
Yeah, and I have a child with an intellectual disability, by the way, so this is also near and dear to my heart. And even though that wasn't the main focus, and we don't really work with that population, of course, I try to be knowledgeable about all the stuff that's out there. So there is if you go to the page that has the database, I have a link to the Think College page, which is actually kind of a New England-based organization, but it's a list nationally of where are these post-secondary programs for students with learning disabilities, many of them located at colleges, because there's a lot of kids with intellectual disabilities who want that college experience. Some of them have pretty good social skills, and they want to go to college and make friends and have fun. But they can't handle college level academics. And there are programs in colleges for them. Again, it's called Think College, and there's a link. I have a link on that page with the database. You can see a link to that. And as I said earlier, I have a colleague who's, I believe she's still located in Connecticut, definitely in New England, who specializes in this population. And she's actually written books where she's reviewed the programs and described them in great detail. So if you reach out to me, I can connect you with her. And you can buy her books or work with her on that. My son happened to go to a program in Connecticut called Chapel Haven for a couple of years. But there's programs all over the country.
Chapel
What
Haven,
else?
Chapel Haven is a wonderful program in New Haven, and we've
Yeah.
actually done some presentations and work with them. So this is the last question. if you know the current process for a student to have a therapy pet on campus or in dorms.
Yeah, so if you mean like an emotional support animal. So colleges vary in terms of how pet friendly they are. And if you Google it, you can probably find some articles and lists. Those lists are not always comprehensive or up to date, but some colleges are pretty welcoming and make it pretty easy for any kid to just bring their pet to campus, whether or not it's an emotional support animal. If you have the documentation that you need an emotional support animal, that is something that you can often get. I have not really been involved in that, but you would need to get a letter from a therapist typically, or a doctor, and work through you're probably going to work through not only the disability services office, but the housing office. And those two offices would sort of talk to each other. So you would probably go first to, depends on the process at the individual college, but there's a good chance you would definitely be dealing with the housing office, but you might also be dealing with disability. And it may also depend on what kind of animal it is. So, colleges are going to be more flexible about some animals than others.
Great. Thank you so
but
much.
that process is going to vary from college to college, just like a lot of other things.
Just like with any legal question, the answer is it depends.
Yeah.
So,
and unfortunately, that's the answer to a lot of questions. If you ask like, what are colleges looking for? Well, it depends on the college. We live in a country where there's a lot of, it isn't one standardized system. In some countries, it is very standardized. You take a test, you get a score on that test, and that tells you what colleges you get into. It's very simple in some countries. In this country, it's way more complex, but we have a lot more choices. So it's a trade-off.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
This has been a phenomenal presentation. You gave us so much information. Thank you to Dr. Endlich for sharing his knowledge and his presentation. And thank you everyone for joining. We'll see you in the main room.
Thanks for having me. Bye.